Good evening, I'm Stephen Cummings, and welcome again to yet another edition of the Citizens Community Forum. Our objective is always to have an engaging, interactive, and civil discourse, and in so doing, help develop a culture of peace and understanding through constructive dialogue and, yes, citizens' participation. Our guests are persons who express views, opinions, and perspectives of their own, and sometimes may not necessarily be that of the FBN network, the Citizens Community Forum, or that of the host. Our topics are also wide-ranging. Discussions at times may be heated and or emotionally charged, but surely we can always find common ground and learn from each other irrespective of our differing views. It has been just over 2 years now into a global pandemic, and though many strides have been made in medicine and being able to respond to a deadly virus, we are all still learning about the COVID-19 pandemic and its emerging variants. Economies and countries continue to be impacted and almost daily have had to readjust their response plan. This evening, inside the Citizens Community Forum, we want to take another look at where we are, and more specifically how Trinidad and Tobago has been responding. Our topic this evening, COVID-19, vaccines and viruses. And to help discuss the issue, I have with me Dr. Tim Gopisingh, oncologist who has worked extensively in the field of medicine in Trinidad and Tobago and internationally over the last 40 years. Former Member of Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago and a former government minister. Dr. Gopeesingh, welcome to the Citizens Community Forum.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cummings. It's a pleasure and an honor to be with you on this program. And I consider it ready. I haven't spoken with you for a long time, but it's a real honor to be with you again.
Yes, and thank you for accepting our invitation to come on to the Citizens Community Forum. Dr. Gopeesingh, I attempted to read out your CV, but I recognize it may have gone over 40 pages.
Yes, well, when you become senior in life, you would have been through it all. And I think I worked very hard, and I find quite satisfied with what I've done over the number of years. I started in medicine in 1969 at UWI, undergraduate, and I came back to Trinidad in 73.
Yes.
In the final year of medicine then, 1973, and we did final year in 73 to 74. I graduated in 74, finished internship in 75, worked at Port of Spain Hospital for 3 years, started in 78, then went to the Institute of Obstetrics and Gynecology at University of London, and specialized in ONG in 78 to 80, graduated in 80 with my membership of the Royal College of Obstetricians, came back to Trinidad in 81, worked at Port of Spain for about 6 months, Port of Spain Hospital again, then went to Mount Hope Women's Hospital in 1981 with Professor Siam Rupnarayan Singh and 2 other colleagues, and we started the whole process of gynecologic work there. And I worked at Mount Hope from 1981 to 2007.
Right.
In 1982, I went to Johns Hopkins University on a scholarship from Johns Hopkins Program of International Education in Obs and Gynae, and spent a number of months there training in academic skills and reproductive medicine.
Right.
And then there I got a scholarship to go to Bogota in Colombia to learn laparoscopic surgery. And I worked in Bogota for a few months and then came back. I brought the first laparoscope back to Trinidad, which started keyhole surgery in 1982. So I was a pioneer in keyhole surgery.
Yes.
82.
As I said, Dr. Gopeesingh, I attempted to go through your CV and I stopped at the first paragraph. So certainly, you have been, here for quite some time, and a professional and an expert in various fields of medicine. Was also an associate professor, a senior lecturer at the Faculty of Medical Sciences of the University of the West Indies, as you may have referenced. Up to 2007, served as a clinical dean of the Faculty of Medical Sciences 1994 to 1997. So quite a long road, Dr. Gopeesingh. You've been there. You've seen it all.
Well, in medicine, you never see all. I mean, every day you learn, and every patient is a new patient.
All
right.
right.
So now I'm a doctor for now 74, 26, and this year will be 48 years. I'm a gynecologist for 42 years, and a cancer specialist in gynecology. I did some training in the University of Toronto as well. Worked at about 5 hospitals in Canada in 1988. That's where I got my training in gynecologic oncology. So I'm about 34 years a gynecologic oncologist, and I pioneered gynecologic oncologic work in the Caribbean in 1988 when I came back. I think I was the sole person in the Caribbean working in the field of gynecologic oncology. And that started as a field globally in about the 1980s. So I was, God was good, I was at the forefront of training. In fact, I was the first non-Canadian to train in Canada in the field of gynecologic oncology.
All right. Dr. Gopeesingh, we may have to have a special program, to go through some of your milestones, of life. But this evening inside the Citizens Community Forum, we want to focus on the pandemic. We're looking at viruses. We're looking at where Trinidad and Tobago is today. Dr. Gopeesingh, I want to start with the discussion, by you helping us to understand the nature of viruses and in relation to the pandemic, because that seems to be among the it has been shaping the national conversation. Help us to understand the nature of viruses, and there are some other areas we would be developing and we go into a little later on into the program.
Well, there are probably about 1 million viruses around the world that live on plants and animals and humans, but basically about 6,000, you will get about an interplay of about 6,000 viruses in real life. But as far as humans, there are far less viruses related to humans, probably less than about 50. But the question of these, from as a child, children are vaccinated to prevent diseases like
measles,
whooping cough, measles, mumps, and children have to be vaccinated before going to school, and there is a time frame for vaccinations from early in life to later on, up to 5 years, 6 years. Children have received most of the vaccines to prevent being infected with the viruses. Polio was a very important one. Smallpox was eradicated. And then you remember the areas of leprosy and so on. So leprosy was a major one. Then we had the pandemic in 1919 that the world will remember. And recently we had you have the regular virus of the common cold, which mutates as well. And this is why citizens have to take one of the vaccines possibly every year or every 2 years because of the mutations of the common cold virus. And then there are the other viruses that adults take, men and women in senior ages. You have the pneumococcal vaccine, you have for the adults the meningitis vaccine, then you have the hepatitis A and hepatitis B and C, and of course the human immunodeficiency virus, HIV. Which started in 1981.
H1N1, yes. And then there was the H1N1.
Yes, and then later on we had the yellow fever situation. Then we had the Zika. Then we had the Mediterranean respiratory syndrome, MERS. Then we had Ebola, and then the SARS virus, and then H1N1, the bird flu situation. And Zika. We had the Zika a few years ago, and now we have the corona SARS-CoV-2.
Yes, which we'll talk a bit more, about a little later on in the program. But it seems as though you talked about 1 million viruses around, from since whenever, Dr. Gopeesingh. It appears to me that if these viruses were at a certain level, we may have been having a pandemic every year.
Some don't affect humans, and their transmission takes place from sometimes from animals to humans, and many of these viruses are not transmitted from animals to humans.
I see.
And they live within animals, and then you have a few that break through between the animals and humans.
So and then breakthrough viruses, yes.
Then human-to-human transmission, as we're having now with the SARS-CoV-2 COVID-19 virus.
All right.
And there is still the question of the transmission of whether the virus that we have now was transmitted from bats.
Yes, I think there is a lively discussion on now about that, yes.
Whether there was a leak from the laboratory in Wuhan, and that question has not been answered critically, and I think there is still a hovering doubt about the origination of that, and I don't think that question has been answered. I think
not just yet. I think there's some investigations that are still on in that vein. But as we're talking about vaccines, Dr. Gopeesingh, the discussion on vaccine production appears also to be making the circle again. In October of 2020, South Africa and India proposed at the World Trade Organization that intellectual property rights on COVID-19 vaccines would be waived for 3 years in an attempt to boost global vaccine manufacture. Now, do you see this as one way of solving issues with global supply and access? Because one will strenuously argue, Dr. Gopeesingh, that COVAX, a mechanism which was set up as a leveraging tool on the side of equity, perhaps may have failed.
I don't think COVAX has failed, but they have not been as successful as they would have liked to be. And the whole question of the manufacturers of the vaccine, like Pfizer and Merck and Dome, and Oxford for the AstraZeneca, and the Pfizer products, the WHO sought to have other countries, Pfizer giving up their patent ability,
yes,
and allow developing countries and other countries which have the ability to manufacture these vaccines, but so that it will be much more will be able to be produced around the world, and over the 200 countries would have been able to get the vaccines at a quicker period of time, and would have saved much more lives. But I don't think the manufacturers allowed the patent to be removed and to allow the generic manufacture by other countries to take place. So that still is a situation where WHO is trying to assist in asking Pfizer and Oxford
to be a bit more fair with the distribution and so yes, I understand that.
Manufactured in other countries, but so far there's no result on that, and so the manufacturing is still taking place. But the Sinopharm in China, Russia has the Sputnik, Oxford has the AstraZeneca, and Pfizer in the United States has theirs, and then Moderna has their manufacturer as well, and Johnson & Johnson also doing some manufacturing.
All right. And
Cuba got their vaccine manufactured recently as well. So Cuba is another manufacturer of vaccines.
All right. And you're listening to and viewing the Citizens Community Forum. I'm Stephen Cummings. I have with me medical expert Dr. Tim Gopisingh, former Member of Parliament and former Government Minister. Our topic this evening, COVID-19 vaccines and viruses. Dr. Gopisingh, as we're talking about the manufacture and patent and so, Trinidad and Tobago, do we have, are we at that level, capacity to maybe pursue patents on, because I mean we have the University of the West Indies, we have a lot of medical experts, people like yourself in the field. Is it that we might be punching a little too much above our weight in that area? Do we have the capacity to go the way of even trying to make our own vaccines?
No, unhesitatingly, I say no at this moment. In the Caribbean, we don't have the capacity to be able to do that. You need a lot of experts in the field, and we don't have enough personnel, and of course the equipment and the laboratory equipment, all the necessary and ancillary biomedical equipment and so on to assist in the manufacture of it. But we have personnel who are very trained in virology and genetic medicine, who can assist and who would be of great assistance to countries if they venture to go out and assist other countries. But collectively, as a Caribbean Caribbean countries, we do not have that ability at this moment.
No, we don't have that punching power. Okay. All right, because putting it another way, Dr. Gopeesingh, one would see this as maybe another avenue where we can have an improvement in terms of global supply. Now, South Africa and India's position has gained the estimated backing of 100 countries or 100 states. In one report that I saw, in principle, the United States also supported a waiver on IP rights relating to vaccines. But as you said, Trinidad and Tobago and by extension the wider Caribbean may not be at that level at this time.
Yes, certainly. We're not there, but India has moved to the forefront, and a number of other countries. Well, I know India for sure. I think, well, of course, Russia is doing it, but China is doing it, but I'm not aware of any other countries. Well, Germany has worked with Merck, with the company Merck, in terms of the Moderna vaccine. I'm not aware of many other countries manufacturing their own vaccines now, except the ones we mentioned earlier on.
Yeah, because I did also pose the question to Dr. Avery Hines, who responded by saying it would not be viable, having regard to what he saw as our inability to measure up, with the bigger players, and you've just echoed that there as well. But going further, Dr. Gopisingh, and as we talked about, this view of having, intellectual property rights, and so of course, this would be not just our inability on what you've just mentioned in those areas, but certainly this would come at a huge financial cost as well.
Well, certainly to set up the infrastructure for such manufacturing would entail millions of dollars to have the laboratory set up and all the necessary checks and balances in laboratories. This is a mammoth undertaking. And just imagine if the word is out that this virus may have escaped from a level 4 laboratory in Wuhan.
Yes.
Could you imagine us trying to manufacture a vaccine now where you have attenuated vaccines being manufactured as the viruses that are injected, the live attenuated viruses, or what some people call it inactivated, as the mRNA vaccines are. And then, of course, the mRNA is a genetic modeling exercise,
yes,
where you have the genetic coding taking place, and the vaccines are manufactured according to the genetic follow-through of the various amino acids and so on.
All right. For the layman, Dr. Gopeesingh, I've heard the term genetic or gene sequencing when you're doing the, I suppose the diagnosis, or trying to find out exactly what kinds of virus or strain there might be, with with respect to a patient or somebody who is COVID-19 positive. Can you just break that down for us? When we talk about gene sequencing, what are we talking about really?
Well, every cell where you have billions of cells, a human will have billions of cells, and these cells are like in nanometers, very, very tiny. We can't even see it and even under electron microscope, it's very difficult to see one of these viruses. Now, every cell has a nucleus and a cytoplasm, and the nucleus consists of mainly DNA. And outside on the cytoplasm, you have the RNA, which is the ribonucleic acid. The nucleus is called deoxyribonucleic acid. So no oxygen aspect is in the nucleus. But in the cytoplasm, you have the RNA, you have the double-stranded RNAs, and you have the single-stranded RNAs. The messenger RNA that has been manufactured is a single-stranded.
Okay.
And then there are a number of genetic makeup of it in terms of a sequencing, and that sequencing is what makes up the whole composition, and that's how the manufacturers were able to unearth the sequencing of the virus and then manufacture something almost similar, but inactivate it so that they could be used for the vaccine.
Right.
So this is why the virus itself now changes the composition of the genetic modeling. Somewhere along the line, you have a variation in the genetic makeup of the virus.
Yes.
And that's how you get the variants coming into play.
Okay. That has been an area that has been very troubling to a lot of people, because it's like moving of the goalpost, Dr. Gopeesingh. The moment that you get to the goalpost, it moves a meter.
Yeah, well, the same thing that happens with let's say the virus that you take the vaccines yearly, the common cold virus, that mutates quite regularly, and so this coronavirus has mutated, and then you have different variants of it. You have the alpha, beta, gamma, lambda, and you have the delta, which was most prominent.
Yes.
And now you have a variation of the Omicron, which they said has a number of mutations within it, more than 20. And they're now finding that there is another mutation.
There's another, there's one even,
But it's only of concern so far, but nothing. WHO hasn't named it as a major variation of the coronavirus.
Of concern, yes, as yet. All right. And you're listening to and viewing the Citizens Community Forum. I'm Stephen Cummings. This evening we are discussing COVID-19 vaccines and viruses. I have with me medical expert Dr. Tim Gopisingh, former Member of Parliament and former government minister. Dr. Gopeesingh, I have to ask you, I want to address this issue of vaccine hesitancy. This seems to have been an issue, not just here in Trinidad and Tobago, but in the Caribbean and the global community. There are groups, I think they are called anti-vaxxers, they're called, many other descriptives as well. But certainly, in Trinidad and Tobago, there continues to be a high level of vaccine hesitancy. Based on the latest Ministry of Health report, the country is still below 50% vaccinated. I think there was somewhere around 49 point something percent as I looked at the information today. For persons who are not opposed to vaccine, what would you believe might be still causing the hesitancy among target segments of the population? Is it a lack of trust, a fear, a weak communication system that has not as yet reached that target section of the population? What is it in your view?
Well, Mr. Cummings, you would have heard me wearing my political hat, speaking about it at the time. This is an educational program, so
yes, it is. It is. Yes.
The politics would not come into it, not much at all. Yes. But the question of there had been a lot of research done. Johns Hopkins University and a number of other university centers had done some preliminary research early in 2021, seeking information from citizens in Caribbean countries, 6 Caribbean countries, to the question of would they take the vaccine. That's before the vaccine came into play. But they knew that the vaccine was being manufactured.
Yes.
And so that the research went on to ask citizens from different countries, 6 Caribbean countries. And at first blush, there was about a 50% hesitancy immediately that they were able to pick up. About 50 to 60% hesitated or had hesitation in accepting the vaccine. From the health perspective, you had about 60% willing and 40% unwilling.
Yes.
But as you said, the issue is a multifactorial one. I think there was lack of trust. Lack of trust. The government, I believe, needed to do a lot more at the beginning to win the mindset of the citizens. And particularly, I know that there are probably about 14 or 15 major anti-vaxxers around the world. And they're able to spread the information on social media like wildfire. I am a strong proponent of vaccination. There is no question about it. I have, from day one, I've been speaking about citizens should ensure that they take the vaccine.
Yes.
And a lot of families with illnesses in their family, and some very senior ones, with multiple, what is termed comorbidities of diabetes, hypertension, obesity, asthma, cancer, immunosuppression, and so on, immunocompromised. Those as families seek answers to whether they should be taking the vaccine or not. And I don't think that we were able, or I think that we were unable, or we did not go out to these citizens in a scientific manner and have the a cadre of strong medical personnel, which we have in Trinidad and Tobago, to go out into the communities, to go out into the areas where we find that there is a propensity not to accept the vaccine. I heard the Minister of Health about 2 weeks ago speaking about they're now going to be bringing forward a number of medical experts, medical and nursing experts.
Yes, they're changing the communication system,
But it is long, it was long overdue. It was due from the beginning that should have been taking place. And we would not have lost so many lives as we have lost now. So even PAHO recommended, an American Health Organization, the Director General spoke about going into the communities, into the small communities, and I have been advocating from day one, coming together with community-based organizations, church organizations, NGOs, and the business communities, and get everybody on board, and get some of the very qualified and skilled and knowledgeable and educated medical and nursing personnel, even with psychiatrists and psychologists, to go out there and speak, and even use the national media. The same way they came out almost every day making a statement to the population. They could have utilized that as well to answer questions. And you remember there was a time in the United States where Professor Fauci and one or two others from the Institute of the Infectious Disease and so on. They were answering questions, and then CNN had one or two of their medical reporters answering questions, and they were asking questions to get answers as well. So we dealt with it a little too late. It's still
we should have had an earlier response. All right, Dr. Gopeesingh, we have to take a break now, and when we come back, I want you to address the issue of the COVID-19 pandemic, viruses, and its impact on children. And we are going to have you respond to that and some other things that we will go into relative to the subject matter this evening. And at this time, we take a short break and come right back. Be part of the Citizens Community Forum, a place where we bring to light and discuss critical community, social and national issues, discussions on health, leadership, governance, crime, education and social justice. Do you feel that there is merit, Mr. Nanku, in that that view that there's some apparent conspiracy against trade unions? I might be putting you on the spot, but
no. As I said, I'm a trade unionist. I came from the bowels of the trade union movement, so I speak openly with the guys. No, Stephen, I would not use a strong word as conspiracy. I would say that some of the matters that are before us, there is validity in it. Okay? Outstanding wage negotiations.
We are in a new space, a new way where it's not the hard and fast, I am the boss, or I am the employee and have my right. There is need for that rapport together now. We have to mature to that new level.
It does not
resolving workplace issues.
It does not always have to be adversarial.
I believe that we were not able to persuade the court on a very clear fact. And the fact is that the minister and his agents and servants, Litco and contractors, have been conducting work at many points along the David to Mondesir interchange, particularly the Faizabad to Mondesir area. And this was not the view of the court. I think that the court erred in not fully looking at the facts before it, and we shall be bringing that specific matter when we do appeal.
Every Wednesday, 8 to 9 p.m., the Citizens Community Forum. Your host, Stephen Cummings.
And welcome back to the Citizens Community Forum. This evening we are discussing COVID-19 viruses and vaccines. I have with me Dr. Tim Gopisingh, medical expert. And Dr. Gopeesingh, before we went to the break, I was touching on the issue of vaccines in relation to children. Now, we've been hearing more recently that the virus, appeared to be attacking persons in the more tender, tender age groupings. Initially, when we we began, to learn of the COVID-19 virus, there was the view that children in certain age groups were not necessarily, in any kind of great danger. What has happened since, Dr. Gopeesingh, that we've been seeing a change in terms of the virus of itself?
So I think that new strain, the Omicron variant, is spreading so quick and so fast and easily that children are picking it up quite easily as well now. So a lot of children are getting this the COVID infection, but it's not severe. It is 0.001 or so might probably need some hospitalization.
Yes.
But the children immune system have been able to fight this thing off very significantly, so that children are not severely compromised. If they do, they get flu-like symptoms like a runny nose, some fever, and a little cough. And very, very rarely they get some body aches and pains. And there are very few hospitalizations of children. And the 5 to 11 seem to be doing quite well. I know the vaccine is available for them now. Parents will have to make the determination if they want to have their children vaccinated. I think there is one situation where the reporting of that had taken too much to the forefront in terms of the multi-inflammatory system, the multi-system inflammatory syndrome.
Yes.
Where a number of the child's organs were being affected, and they became infected, and therefore it was termed multi-inflammatory system syndrome or multi-system inflammatory syndrome.
Yeah.
And that is extremely rare when one gets the vaccine. And
it's because I was about to ask you, how rare is that?
Very rare. I think 0.0001%, probably even less than that. And countries around the world, the larger countries, have reported just few incidents like that. I think in one country, major country, you would have had about 10 to 15 reports of that. For the children who have been vaccinated 12 to 18 now, I think there were about two cases like that. Very rare, but the benefits of the vaccine to the children 12 to 18 outweigh all the negatives that you may conjure up. And so children, the additional issue is that now the children are going off to school from next week. The question is, if they get the vaccine, if they get the infection, whether they will take the infection home to their families at home, where they might be elderly citizens. So this is one of the other reasons why the World WHO had advocated for children to take the vaccine as well. Besides protecting themselves, you would be protecting members of the family if by chance they get it. And with this Omicron variant now, a lot of citizens and would be children as well are becoming COVID positive and unaware that they are positive. Because the symptoms are so mild. And I want to make this plea, Stephen, that a lot of citizens now believe that they're getting the common cold and they have a little bit of runny nose and flu-like symptoms.
That was going to be my next. That was going to be my next question to you, Dr. Gopeesingh. But I would allow you to develop that point. Yes.
Their first responsibility is to ensure that they do not have COVID, and if they don't have the funding, do the quick antigen testing, which is not as sensitive. But if you can afford and go to the government centers for the PCR testing, they should have the testing. And if they have these symptoms, they must assume it is a COVID symptom and quarantine themselves and isolate themselves for at least 5 or 6 days and ensure that they protect other members of the family.
Yes, because we are into the flu season.
Yeah, well, you have to think that you have COVID until proven otherwise, not the flu, and it's not COVID. And I would want to join with the government and recommending that that they make the statements time in, time out, that citizens who are having symptoms resembling flu-like symptoms, they must rule out immediately whether they have COVID or not. They should quarantine themselves, isolate themselves, and then have themselves tested, and to ensure that they do not have COVID, then they are allowed to reintegrate with the members of the family and their friends and so.
Yeah.
So
because
the children we have to be very careful when the children go back out to school, and they have to wear the masks. They must be distanced apart, but it is very difficult to manage and control children.
Indeed. Well, Dr. Gopeesingh, you being a former Minister of Education will be able to understand, I suppose, more deeply as to what happens, within a school environment with children. Children can't, when we talk about staying 5 feet apart and what have you, it's difficult for children to observe those kinds of regulations, and one wonders what kind of environment would really be come the opening of school, and I know that there are a lot of fears. The parents are also concerned about their children and how or what are the protocols going into this new school term. Yes.
For the principals and for the teachers and for the children themselves, they will have to move around with their masks on. They will have to sanitize very regularly. The desks will have to be cleaned appropriately. The Ministry of Health, Ministry of Education have to provide the necessary sanitizers, the spraying of the seating accommodation, because this Omicron variant now is sitting on surfaces for a longer period of time.
But it is also saying that what I've also been reading recently to Dr. Gopeesingh is that the Omicron may not have been or may not as yet be as, I suppose, yes, transmissible, but not as deadly as previous viruses. Is that the case? That this may be a milder strain?
Well, we are grateful that it is milder, and most of the patients who have been infected and a lot of them are just getting mild symptoms. And God has been good. We must be grateful for the fact that the symptoms are milder than the Delta variant. But of course, there might be one or two who will have more severe symptoms. But generally, the Omicron virus infection has been shown internationally to be less offensive and less. Well, you have the chances of becoming admitted to emergency or to the intensive care unit is less severe, and therefore very few are being admitted into the ICUs and HDUs with the Omicron variant. I know Trinidad and Tobago has not been doing the massive testing for the Omicron variant because I think they do sporadic testing.
Yes.
But if you have the PCRs, I think one or two of the private labs can do the PCR testing. And
I know. And that's
every one of the tests.
That's an interesting area too, Dr. Gopisingh, as you talk about testing. I think that was one of the early calls that we may not, as a country, at the start of the pandemic, we may not have, have had a jump on the system where testing is concerned in terms of the rapidity of testing. And now there's the issue of the antigen kits. I'm also hearing that maybe we should have probably been considering having home testing kits. Is that something that you would support as well? Having maybe a national program or maybe a facility whereby citizens can do their testing at home?
Mr. Cummings, the whole question of testing, I feel very unhappy, and I spoke out very strongly about the under-testing that took place when they started between March 2020 and even going up to the election time, where much more testing should have been done. The Minister of Health had indicated that they were going to put PCR testing in the hospitals, the apparatus. The University of the West Indies was going to assist them, but that never took place. And there's only CARFA was able to do the testing, and then he had resisted the private labs doing the testing. Today, we have over 220,000 citizens who have had testing done privately, which would have cost the citizens nationally over $250 million, because the test was about $1,500 for one, then to $1,200, now $1,000. And if you look over the weekend, an individual nationally now wants to have a test done, they search to find out where they can have a test done freely. They end up having to pay for the test, and this is something that is not right. They should be readily available to citizens to go in a number of centers. Even the health centers should have been doing the testing. You have 105 health centers, and nobody should be able to have difficulty in getting a test done. You brought up the question about the antigen testing. We have been calling for the antigens testing kit to be brought into the country. The government should be purchasing these, helping to distribute them in pharmacies and in the health centers, and have these readily available. And even though there is a low sensitivity and aberrant type of situation where it is not as accurate as it ought to be, in terms of sensitivity, is not as high in the 90s as it should be, but it still does give you an idea of where you are in relation to the virus. So it should be more widely available. It should be, the government should ensure that they have it in the pharmacies available for people, and then in the health centers and in the testing sites, and probably consider what the United States has done. Distribute one or two of these tests for family, so that if the situation arises, they will do their tests at home. And if there's any doubt, they'll move to the PCR testing.
All right, and you're listening to and viewing the Citizens Community Forum. I'm Stephen Cummings. We are discussing this evening the topic COVID-19, vaccines and viruses. I have with me Dr. Tim Gopisingh, medical expert, former government minister, former member of Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago. Dr. Gopisingh, this is an educational program, but I wanted to touch on, to have you respond to the parallel healthcare system. Very early, we would have instituted a parallel healthcare system, and the aim was to not have the burden be placed on the traditional healthcare system in Trinidad and Tobago. From where you sit, has the system worked for us in Trinidad and Tobago? Where do you see us, or is it that we have put a system in place that needed to be probably tweaked? Is the parallel healthcare system working in your view?
Well, the parallel healthcare system is meant to allow the normal flow of patients who need medical attention, surgery and emergency treatment and clinic management and so on, to go on as normal, and have the management of the COVID patients separately. There was an attempt to do this, to have Couva Hospital to be able to have the HDUs and ICUs and step-down units. But what has happened is that they have taken away basically beds from the normal healthcare system, personnel from the normal healthcare system, laboratory engagement from the normal healthcare system, so to assist in this COVID management. So it's really splitting the normal healthcare system by 2/3 remaining in the normal way and a third moving out to assist in COVID management. So therefore, what they call the parallel health system and in the management of COVID patients have really taken away from the management of normal patients who needed surgery, who needed clinic management, who needed laboratory testing and investigations. And unfortunately, a lot of patients have died waiting for surgery. A lot of patients' complications continued and worsened while we were trying to deal with the COVID. So in summary, I would think that unfortunately, we have not been able to fully attend to the normal citizenry in a normal way. And it basically worsened. And well, of course, the parallel healthcare system, which I speak about, left a lot of deficiency. And I've been speaking about it, Mr. Cummings, in terms of the real negatives, the inability to help the patients in emergency tents, in the accident and emergency departments, the long waiting time for the ambulance service, the lack of the availability of life-saving drugs, the reduction in personnel of senior nursing and medical personnel. So it has unfortunately not done as we expected.
Right. So you're saying that the concept is a good one, but there were some issues that needed close attention.
I think that the lack of management, the lack of capacity of and the ability to have proper managers at the front line, assisted by senior medical and nursing personnel, and of course with the ancillary backup of infrastructure and laboratory services and so on. It has been a failure.
Well, I know, Dr. Gopeesingh, there's a whole new discussion where that is concerned, where the management of the, of the parallel healthcare system is concerned. But, this evening we want to, to keep our focus on the subject matter. And again, I have to ask you, I have to put this out, and this is not a political question really, but what we saw going, for health among the national budgetary estimates of revenue and expenditure for the last several years, say from 2015 to present, we had almost a constant where estimates of revenue and expenditure 2014 to 2015 was 5.545 billion, 2015 to 2016 6 billion, 2016 to 2017 6 billion again, 2017 to 2018 6 billion, just rounding off those figures, 2018 to 2019 5.6 billion, 2019 to 2020 5.6. We also had in 2019 to 2020 6 again, 6.084, 2020 to 2021, 6.050, and in 2021-2022, 6.395. So it appears as though, Dr. Gopeesingh, in the last several years, we've had almost a constant in terms of, budgetary allocations going towards the Ministry of Health. And more specifically, we saw where there was a slight jump in terms of the allocation for 2021-2022 at exactly 6.395 billion. What has the country, you believe, Dr. Gopeesingh, and as I said, this is not a political question, this is an education platform. Do you believe that the country has gotten value for money when you look at the expenditure side?
I would say that health is a bottomless pit. The more you throw into it, you very rarely get the rewards for your expenditure. But the issue of spending 6.4 billion on health is a question of how do you manage the funds.
Yes, it goes back to management again. Yes.
Management. If you do not have the effective managers who are able to do what they can with the limited funding or with the funding that is available, you will find yourself in difficulty all the time. And pharmaceuticals take about 600 million, and then health personnel take a significant amount, at more than $3 billion for health personnel, nursing, paramedical. But then when you look at the other expenditures for equipment and for consumables and so on,
yes,
you can do a lot better with the same amount of 6.3 billion. But I would have expected the government to give a little more from the 5 billion that they said that they had spent.
Yes, and these are only initial the budgetary figures. Yeah. There are other variations that would have come, as you rightly know.
Right. So the question of the amount of money spent for 21 and 22 should have been increased a little more, to make sure that you pay for much more nursing and medical personnel, pay more for pharmaceuticals and for medical equipment. And that would have helped. But this is my point. I'm a member of a party, the United National Congress. This has not been discussed whatsoever with the party. But this is my perspective, and I share that with my previous colleague, Minister Fuad Khan, who both of us share this issue of that we should be moving away from 4 regional health authorities with almost immediate effect just after this COVID is finished.
Yes.
We can take care with 2 regional health authorities. Too much money is spent on repetitive management at the top level,
and
where you have a CEO and you have a whole administrative team right there. And when you buy and you purchase consumables for each one of these 4 authorities, and they do it by themselves, the issue of purchasing a wider amount at a cheaper rate, you can do that. Why are we not moving with the other Caribbean countries as prime ministers, coming together and say we will purchase pharmaceuticals en bloc for the Caribbean countries, and we share the amount, we'll get them cheaper. So there are a number of things, and then a number of the pharmaceuticals that are used for diabetes and hypertension. The Minister of Health had promised to change some of these to make them more effective and efficient, and he had not done so, to change the drugs that were 2 cents and 5 cents. And that's why we find the complications of diabetes and hypertension worsening. And this is why the patients are dying in the HDUs and ICUs, because they have uncontrolled comorbidities.
All right. Well, this is the Citizens Community Forum. You're listening to and viewing the Citizens Community Forum. I'm Stephen Cummings. I have with me Dr. Tim Gopisingh, medical expert and former Member of Parliament, former government minister, and we are discussing the issue of COVID-19, viruses and vaccines. Dr. Gopeesingh, we have just a few minutes again before we end the program, but what do you see, Dr. Gopeesingh, as we close the interview? And after this question, I'd also want to, to have some closing remarks from you. What do you see could be the real social cost to Trinidad and Tobago? Do you believe that there is enough resilience in the economy, to be able to withstand 2 years plus of economic shock due to, a pandemic and more specifically COVID-19 as it relates to Trinidad and Tobago?
Well, Mr. Cummings, that the economic shock to Trinidad and Tobago has been very severe. And citizens lost their jobs, businesses had to close. My understanding, there are about 7,000 small businesses have closed, medium-sized businesses have closed, the manufacturing sector had been hit. Parents were not able to go to work because they had to stay and try and help their children at home. Some of them lost their jobs. Over 100,000 would have lost their jobs. So the economic impact of this has been severe and terrible on Trinidad and Tobago. And this is where the government had to say that they're coming in to give some support to people who were renting, people who needed social service assistance, but not enough. I don't think it hasn't been done in a scientific manner so that it could have been very quickly and effectively and efficiently done. And this is where we lack the skills and the ability to do those things. As far as coming back to norm, even though we are moving slowly into becoming regaining some normalcy, we are far away from it.
Okay.
And this year we'll see a continuation of the worsening situation. Very few businesses will come back up to be able to withstand the onslaught for the last 2 years and continuing.
Okay.
And citizens that remain still demoralized and mentally affected more so than ever before.
All right. So you see the impact, the social impact, being massive. I've also heard the term, Dr. Gopeesingh, that the playbook has not been written. We appear to be writing it as we go along.
That's right. Well, it's continuing, but I would really like to find out, Stephen, where has the government spent this $5 billion that they said that they spent on COVID-19? I think it is clouded in secrecy. There's lack of accountability, lack of transparency into the expenditure. They cannot account for it on an open basis. And if they moved and they spent 200 million more in the health sector, that is a minuscule part of the 5 billion.
Okay.
So where did the 5 billion go?
Well,
I think there is no accountability.
Well, I'm sure, Dr. Gopeesingh, there is a mechanism for that. There is a parliament. I imagine that the opposition, can put that on the order paper, or even at the time of,
The answers were not forthcoming at all.
Okay, all right. Question time to the Prime Minister, or the Minister of Health, as to some clarity, in terms of that expenditure.
It has to be sent as a written, as a question for written answer.
For written,
so that you will have,
something detailed response.
Yeah, government evade these type of questions.
Well, Dr. Gopeesingh, you have been there. This is it's nothing new in terms of how the rigors of the Parliament and the questioning and what have you, so that one can well understand, that there is, as I said, there is a process. But sometimes, the process. People question the process. How fair is the process? But we have to leave it there, Dr. Gopeesingh, at this time. And before we close the program, we just want to have you give some closing remarks to Trinidad and Tobago. We are in a pandemic. Of course, we talked about the economic and the social impact on citizens in Trinidad and Tobago. And of course, you would want to just wanted to give some closing remarks as we end the interview.
Well, the first is a repeated appeal to the national community to get your vaccines. If you haven't been vaccinated, your chances of dying are very high. If you are vaccinated, your chances of living is more than 99.5%, and you should really avail yourself of the vaccine. As doctor for over 45 years or 47 years, whatever, I am yet to see any major contraindication to not taking the vaccine. What there is, those who are very ill are the ones who should be taking the vaccine, because if you do get COVID and you're very ill, your chances of dying very, very likely. If you take the vaccine, your chances of being alive very high. So continue to advise the national population, please ensure you take your vaccine. And those who are vulnerable with the major comorbidities, get your third shot, or whether it's a booster shot. And I would advise, and I want to advise the government, that it should ensure that the third shot should be a heterologous vaccine, not the same as the first two that were given when the patients had it. If they had 2 Sinopharm, get a Pfizer. If you had 2 AstraZeneca, get a Pfizer, and so on. It has been shown scientifically that the heterologous vaccination renders possible. Yeah, and also protect yourself. Still do your normal wearing of your mask. If you can get the N95 mask, keep your distance, wash your hands. If you feel any symptom at all, like what you may call common cold, stay away from the rest of your family immediately. I advise the government to start bringing in much more quick antigen testing, have the PCR more available for citizens nationally. Speed up the education program through every nook and cranny, get much more frontline doctors involved, and so on. And it's a multitude of things. And of course, you need better management at the regional health authorities.
Yes, we did reference. You did reference that.
To be there, you need skills and professionalism.
Okay.
And of course, get more senior doctors and nurses in the front line assisting in saving lives. And medicine as well.
Dr. Gopeesingh, we have to leave it there at the moment. I get the sense that we'll have to continue the discussion. We'll have to continue the discourse on this subject matter, because, COVID-19 is not going anywhere, very soon. So that we'll have to revisit the discussion at another time. But I want to thank you so much for taking the time to sit with us on the Citizens Community Forum.
Mr. Cummings, thank you very kindly for having me. It's a privilege and an honor, and I cherish this opportunity to speak with you and your listeners on this issue. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Dr. Gopeesingh there, former Member of Parliament, former government minister and medical expert. Again, Dr. Gopeesingh, Tim Gopisingh, talking with us on the Citizens Community Forum. Our topic this evening, COVID-19 vaccines and viruses. I'm Stephen Cummings. Until another program, see you next Wednesday.
It was a famous poet who once said, "They came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for the communists, and I did not speak out because I was not a communist. And then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me." Words there from famous poet Martin Niemöller, 1892 to 1984.